listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me, non-judgmental talk about infidelity with Dr. Marie Murphy. If you're looking for new perspectives on complicated relationship issues, you've come to the right place.
Days go by, they're crawling by.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Marie Murphy. I'm a relationship coach and I help people who are engaging in anything they think counts as infidelity to deal with their feelings, clarify what they want, and make decisions about what they're going to do. No shame, no blame, no judgments. If you want my help resolving your infidelity situation in a way that's truly right for you, let's work together. There are two ways we can do this. We can work together one-on-one via Zoom. And if you're interested in this option, the first step is to schedule an introductory coaching session with me through my website, mariemurphyphd.com/services. Or you can purchase my self-guided course called You're Not the Only One, which contains powerful teachings and assignments that you can access online all the time. That's available through the services page of my website too. What happened to the third option that I've been talking about lately, you ask? That group coaching program / secret society thing that I was promoting for a while, what happened to that? Well, here's what happened. I'm not offering it anymore. I pulled the plug on that project, and I'm actually going to tell you all about why in the next episode of my podcast. But today we have other things to talk about. I have a lot of things to tell you today. And one of the things I have to tell you, which might or might not be important to you, I'm going to save for the very end of the episode. So be aware that there's an unusual detail coming at the very end today. But before we get to that, today, I'm telling you part 2 of the story I started last week, which is the story of how I came to do the work I do. And I'm going to pick up right where I left off last week without any sort of recap. Last week, we got to the point in my story where I discovered life coaching in a moment of professional crisis. And I was finding certain resources from the world of life coaching really helpful. And I was starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, I might want to be a life coach. And on the one hand, this sounded like a very exciting possibility to me. It seemed like coaching might provide me with the opportunity to combine all of the parts of my professional history that I liked the most and the opportunity to use my capacities and expertise in a way that I thought I would really enjoy. And that sounded pretty great. And I felt hopeful about my professional future for the first time in a long time, which felt really good. Recognizing, oh, hey, I think I know what I want to do with myself. I think I know what I want to allow myself to become. Felt a hell of a lot better than being miserable in my professional life and not knowing what to do about that, right? But I was also very skeptical. I didn't think that being a life coach was a quote unquote real job by any stretch of the imagination. And what I mean by that, I think this is what I meant by that at the time, is that I didn't think that life coaching was a job that any serious people would possibly take seriously. I didn't think that anyone would take me seriously or respect me, not only as a professional, but as a human, if I labored under the title of life coach. Now, on the one hand, I had gotten a lot of value from coaching myself, but on the other hand, coaching was and is an unregulated profession, if you can even call it a profession at all. Sociologists would probably say that it doesn't qualify as a profession by sociological definitions of what a profession is. Now, you may be wondering, who the fuck cares what the sociological definition of a profession is and whether your job counts as falling into one or not? And the answer is, I cared. I cared a lot. And you may also be wondering, who the fuck cares if a profession is a profession or a quasi-profession or is regulated or not, so long as it helps people? And the answer is, I used to think that if I wasn't a member of a quote unquote real profession, people weren't going to take me seriously. Because anyone could declare themselves a life coach. There's no formal gatekeeping system that controls who can and who cannot deem themselves a coach or be considered a coach. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but for a while, I was very uncomfortable with the idea of declaring myself a member of what some people might consider a bunch of snake oil salespeople. Now, allow me to emphasize that this was deeply ironic on multiple counts. For one thing, even though I thought I had what sounded like a prestigious enough job title, my job title was not actually all that prestigious in the scheme of things. Sure, I did have to have a PhD in order to get that job that I last had, but did anyone really care about that? Maybe like 4 or 5 people did, but not that much if they did care at all, and maybe not even that many people cared. And moreover, did anyone on planet Earth other than myself care about what my job was or what my job title or job description was? To the best of my knowledge, the answer to those questions is no. And on top of all of that, hanging on to my quote unquote prestigious job that wasn't actually all that prestigious was making me totally miserable. From where I stand today, I find it absolutely hilarious that I was so afraid of leaving this job that I hated and pursuing work that I was genuinely excited about because I was so afraid of what people would think about my job title. But I will tell you that I did not find any of this funny back then. At the time, all of my fears about what people would think about me if I became a life coach were very real to me, and they were a very big deal to me. And I didn't really know how to deal with those fears, so they slowed me down for quite a while. Because I was so afraid of what people might think about me if I became a life coach, I hesitated to take any kind of action towards becoming a coach for a lot longer than I could have. I wanted to enroll in a life coach training program, but instead of just doing that, I came up with all of these reasons why I couldn't do it. And I let those reasons have their way with me for a little while. Not forever, thankfully, but for, at least a number of months. I didn't stay completely stuck. I didn't, never enroll in life coach training, thank goodness. But I did not move forward particularly boldly or efficiently. Another thing that was going on at the time was that in addition to being really afraid of what would happen if I gave up on my quote unquote real job and took on the less respectable role of life coach, I also had a lot of fears about being an entrepreneur. I didn't talk about this in last week's episode, but before I finished my PhD, I had a stretch of trying to start up my own holistic health private practice, which included a combination of bodywork and yoga therapy and what I then called spiritual guidance, but now recognize was basically a version of coaching. And there's a lot I could say about the experience of starting up this private practice, but for today's purposes, the main points are that I'd had really unrealistic expectations about what it would take to get that practice to the point of creating full-time income for me. And then my unrealistic expectations weren't met. And then I made that mean that the whole thing had been a failure. And from there, from thinking that I'd failed in starting up my own practice, I convinced myself that I'd better just finish my PhD and get a salaried job based on my sociology credentials and just give up on my dreams of working in some integrative wellness, helping people be the best version of themselves capacity and be happy enough with an okay enough job. For years, I really thought that this attempt at being an entrepreneur was an epic failure on my part. and a failure that was proof of my fundamental inability to make a living providing services that I enjoyed providing, right? And so when I started thinking about becoming a coach, I was, first of all, really scared of not being taken seriously because coaching wasn't a real job, so to speak. And I also had all of these fears that I just wasn't capable of being an entrepreneur. And all of this put together was extremely dramatic and extremely unpleasant. If you are wondering, why didn't I just get myself a good life coach to help me deal with all of this nonsense? The answer is I did invest in getting myself coached back then, but not to the extent that I could have. And I will tell you that if there's one thing that I would do differently if I went back and did it all over again, I would have invested in getting better support a whole lot sooner. But I did avail myself of some coaching back then, and what I did get was helpful in moving myself forward, right? And despite all of my doubt and drama, I had just enough faith in my vision of what was possible to keep moving towards it. Months after initially having the idea, I finally enrolled in my first life coach training program. And once I started it, A, I loved it, and B, I realized that I kind of already was a coach. What I was learning how to do in my first coach training was very similar to what I'd been doing under different auspices for years. In some respects, elements of coaching are very similar to talking to strangers about their sex lives. In some respects, elements of coaching are very similar to conducting a qualitative, in-depth, semi-structured sociological interview. In some respects, coaching is like doing a really good intake before you do body work on someone or give someone a private yoga lesson. In some respects, coaching is a lot like what I'd been doing during the million hours I'd spent helping my friends sort through their relationship challenges. And I really do mean a million hours helping friends sort through relationship challenges. Before I ever dreamed of becoming a coach, I was that person who got a lot of calls for help with dealing with relationship stuff. And in a way, I absolutely loved that. I loved helping people sort through their relationship challenges. And I thought I was pretty good at it. And evidently, my friends thought so too, because they kept calling me and asking for help. And I was happy to provide it, but after some of those marathon phone calls that went on for hours and required multiple bathroom breaks, I would sometimes think to myself, I think I should be getting paid for this. So after I started my first coach training program, I was like, oh, yeah, I've actually been doing this for a long time. Sure, I can benefit from some more training. Sure, I can benefit from being specifically trained as a coach and given some coaching tools. But essentially, I'm home. And on the one hand, these recognitions delighted me. But on the other hand, I still didn't really believe that it was okay for me to be a coach, and I still didn't really believe that it was possible for me to make a living as a coach. It took me a lot of time and effort and tears to begin to believe that I really could free myself from the self-imposed prison of my many and various limiting beliefs about what I could and couldn't do work-wise. It took a lot of intentional shifting of my beliefs to get over the idea that it was better to have a quote-unquote real job than to be a coach. And it took a lot of work to give myself permission to believe that not only could I be a coach, I could be a coach in whatever ways I wanted to be. And to believe that I could draw from all of my expertise and experience and put that into my coaching work, right? I didn't have to be a cookie cutter coach like the coaching schools that I have attended or learned from, like kind of teach you to be. I had to believe that I could put everything I had to offer into a new package, that it was my services, and put that forth into the world. Now, all of this was a huge struggle for me, but I really want to be clear that none of this needed to be as much of a struggle as it was. The reason why this professional transition of mine was such a struggle was because I made it so, because I allowed it to be so. And that's okay in a sense. As our good friend Ram Dass tells us, you have to go as fast as you can, but you can only go as fast as you can. I was just moving through my own evolution and growth at the only pace I could then, and in a sense, that's fine. But does the process of change need to be as torturous and slow as I let it be in this stage of my life, this phase of my life? No, it does not. So, how the hell did I get myself from not really believing I could be a coach to being where I am now? One tiny little step at a time. One tenacious step forward at a time. I held on to every scrap of desire and hope and faith that I could. I knew that I wanted to be a coach and make a living from coaching. Even though there were a lot of moments when I didn't quite believe it was possible, I knew I wanted it to be possible. So I cultivated as much faith as I could, and I took one little tiny action step at a time. I did all of the things that one does to start up a coaching practice. And as I was doing all of these things, I felt tons of self-doubt. I felt immense uncertainty. It was really uncomfortable, and I didn't like that. And I thought all of this was very unfair, and I had a million dramatic pity parties for myself. But I didn't quit. I kept moving towards what I knew I wanted. And gradually, not as instantly as I might have liked, not even as quickly as I might have liked, but gradually my efforts started to get me more of what I wanted. I found clients and clients found me. I loved working with them. They loved working with me. It wasn't a glamorous story of instant success, but it was movement in the direction I wanted to be heading in. At first, I was willing to coach people on anything and everything. When you're learning how to be a coach and when you're learning how to build a coaching practice, there are two schools of thought that you're likely to encounter. And one is that there's nothing wrong with being a general life coach, and that if you're skilled at coaching and you're skilled at utilizing the tools that you use as a coach, you can effectively coach people on pretty much anything, and it's totally legitimate to market yourself as a general life coach. The other school of thought is that it's really important to have a niche and to have as specific of a niche as possible. And at first I was like, I don't want to choose a niche. I don't want to limit myself in that way. I'm interested in all aspects of the human experience. And besides, when you're coaching someone, one thing usually leads to another, and you end up far from the subject you started coaching the client on in the first place. And all of that's kind of fair enough. But having this orientation to my work and to marketing did make marketing my offerings as a coach a little more challenging. When you're trying to talk to everyone about the value of your work, it's hard to talk to anyone about the value of your work. Or at least it can be. This isn't, by the way, if you're listening and you're a coach or you're thinking about becoming a coach, don't take this as the only perspective on this matter. Just take it as one perspective on this matter. But what happened for me was finally some marketing teacher I was working with, and I worked with more than a couple, convinced me to narrow my focus. And I said, okay, fine. I'll narrow myself down to being a relationship coach. And why that wasn't an obvious thing for me to do initially, I couldn't tell you. But when this marketing teacher learned more about my professional background, she was like, why aren't you a relationship coach already? Why didn't you declare yourself as such right out of the gate? Why aren't you broadcasting what you can offer people in this realm already? You have more expertise in the area of human sexuality and human relationships than most people who consider themselves experts in this department do. What are you waiting for? And I was like, that's a pretty good point. I do have a lot of experience in this realm, gosh darn it. And this subject matter is infinitely interesting to me. Gee, it kind of makes sense for me to be a relationship coach. How about that? But despite the profundity of these recognitions, I still felt all the fear, all the timidity, all the self-doubt, all the hesitation. I still thought that I had to wait for some magical permission-giving fairy to come along and say, hey, it's okay if you call yourself a relationship coach. It's legitimate for you to do that. I was terrified as coming off as some quack who appointed herself as an expert but didn't have anything to back that up with, even though I knew I kind of had a lot to back it up with. But what happened was, to echo a recurring theme of today's episode, even though my confidence was shaky, I kept taking small steps forward. I hung my shingle as a relationship coach, so to speak. I put myself out there in that way, in all of the small ways that I could. And gradually, clients with what I considered pretty interesting relationship challenges started to find me. It wasn't just people who were like, how can I be happier in my relationship or that kind of stuff. Don't get me wrong. The question of how we can be happier in our relationships is always an interesting subject to explore. But I had folks coming to me who were like, my partner has been accused of a sex crime and I don't know how to deal with that. Or I've been accused of a sex crime and I don't know how to deal with that. Or my partner wants to have an open relationship and I agreed to do that even though I didn't really want to. And now I'm super jealous and super depressed and I don't know what to do. And this kind of stuff was more along the lines of what I was and am deeply interested in. Not just like, how can I get my spouse to do more of the housework? Not that that isn't important. It is important and it is interesting. But a layer beyond that is even more interesting to me. And so perhaps strangely, perhaps not so strangely, people who were cheating on their partners or engaging in some other kind of infidelity started to find me. I was marketing to this audience a little bit, so there was certainly some effort on my part to advertise that I offered non-judgmental approaches to infidelity, but I was also attempting to offer a non-judgmental perspective on other relationship issues too. So it wasn't that I was exclusively focusing on cheating intentionally to begin with. But people who were cheating in some form or another kept finding me, and I found that I really liked working with them, and I found that I had a rather uniquely useful approach to dealing with infidelity. And in part, I learned this through my clients' responses to my work. But in addition to that, when it started to become apparent to me that I was officially playing in the infidelity sandbox, I took a broad look at the other kinds of resources that were out there for people engaging in infidelity, and I was shocked by what I found. Shocked and saddened and dismayed and horrified, and I was just like, okay, just about every single thing that other people out there have to say about infidelity is at best completely useless. Now, let me be clear that I am exaggerating a little here. There are, of course, some perspectives on infidelity that are out there that are not completely useless. I am not trying to suggest that I am literally the only person who has any kind of a non-judgmental approach to infidelity or any kind of a helpful approach to infidelity. But that disclaimer stated, my observation was and is that a lot of what is out there in terms of resources for people who are actively cheating is pretty bad. Not just not helpful, but actually quite detrimental. And in a sense, this was just about all I needed to see that I had a contribution to make. I was like, okay, here we have this very common human behavior, and by that I mean infidelity, and help that is actually helpful for people who are engaging in this behavior is practically non-existent. How is this even possible? How has this problem been allowed to persist for as long as it has? This is not a good situation, and someone needs to do something about this. So I said to myself, well, maybe I need to do something about this. I am fully equipped to approach infidelity from a very different angle than most people do. And I am fully equipped to actually help people who are engaging in infidelity make sense of their situations without scolding them for what they're doing. Oh, and I actually happen to enjoy coaching people who are engaging in infidelity. Why not go all in on this? I am ready and willing to take this on, and this is an area in which I can make a helpful contribution. Let's get to work. So that's more or less what happened. That's more or less how I got from being like, oh my God, I don't want to be a sociologist that does a little bit of holistic health work on the side, to being a coach who calls herself a relationship coach who specializes in providing non-judgmental assistance to people who are engaging in infidelity. Now, sometimes people ask me if I got into this work because of personal experiences I've had with infidelity. And the answer is no, but that's not to say that I haven't had personal experiences with infidelity. I certainly have. I have cheated and I've been cheated on, and I learned a lot from those experiences. But while my own experiences with infidelity were definitely a big deal when they were happening, I never chose to consider them life-defining experiences. Were they an educational part of my relationship history? Yes, of course they were. Did they and do they inform my capacity to understand other people's experiences with infidelity? Certainly. But my experiences with infidelity don't factor all that heavily into my sense of who I am personally or my approach to what I do professionally. And I think that there's something in this that's really important for everyone to consider. Infidelity does not have to be a life-defining experience. Now, your infidelity situation may sure as hell seem like a life-defining experience when you're in the thick of it, and that is fair enough. But it doesn't have to be a really big deal forever. You can deal with it, you can digest all of the emotions associated with it, and you can decide how you want to move forward in your life beyond your infidelity situation or situations, and then you can do exactly that. You can learn from your experiences and you can move on. And I think it's really important to say this because there's definitely an idea out there that infidelity does define us in inescapable ways. If we cheat, we are a cheater, maybe forever. If we're cheated on, we are a victim of infidelity. But although it's important to acknowledge that those ideas are out there, it's also important to recognize that these ways of thinking are totally optional. You do not have to subscribe to them. You don't have to define yourself by your experiences with infidelity. You don't have to mark yourself with a scarlet letter A forever. You don't have to define yourself as someone who has been a quote-unquote victim of infidelity forever. So while I do have personal experience with infidelity, and that certainly informs my approach to my work to some extent, it's just one ingredient in the soup that is my work. And I don't think it's a defining one, and I'll tell you one of the many reasons why. When I was putting this episode together and thinking about how I was going to address the question of whether or not I have personal experience with infidelity, I had to think back, and I was like, okay, so yeah, I do have experience with infidelity. What was that again? And I remembered several experiences I'd had that I hadn't thought about in a really long time. And some of them were pretty gnarly when they were happening. I have been on the receiving end of other people behaving in ways that I really did not like. And I've engaged in some behavior that could be considered pretty sordid. And at the time, it was all very significant and unpleasant, or dramatic at least. But apparently, I also forgot about large portions of it until I started deliberately excavating my memories on this topic. So looking back, yes, there is definitely an element for me of having been there and done that. But those experiences are not a huge driving force behind me doing the work I do. What is a huge driving force behind me doing the work I do is my deep desire to find ways of destigmatizing stigmatized topics in the realm of sexuality and love and relationships. I firmly believe that we all, as individuals, deserve to be respected in the fullness of our humanity. And I firmly believe that we as a society have to find different ways of contending with the fullness of the human experience, right? And so it's important to me to attempt to be part of that effort. Another driving force behind the work I do is my deep curiosity about and respect for humans, especially in the realm of their love lives / sex lives / romantic lives. And a deep desire to help us all find more freedom and ease in our own lives by assuming the power that we do have to shape our experiences of living. There are a lot of constraints, and I'll loosely say unchangeable circumstances that we have to contend with. That's for sure. But most of us are not using the full extent of the power we have to shape our lives in the ways that we can. As a sociologist, I studied sexuality-related inequalities and how entrenched they are and how unchangeable they may be and how, deep these patterns are in social life. And I tell you what, it's a hell of a lot more rewarding to help people contend with sexual stigma or sexuality-related stigma or relationship-related stigma than to talk endlessly and in great detail about how bad sexuality-related stigma is, right? Oh my God, what a change, what a liberation. And so to that effect, although infidelity in relationships hasn't been a life-defining experience for me, being faithful to my desire to do a certain kind of work and being tenacious enough to create this role for myself, even though for a while I was totally convinced that I didn't have it in me to be an entrepreneur, has been a life-defining experience for me. And as this episode and last week's episode have probably made abundantly clear, this has been like a major challenge in my life. And this sort of challenge, in a similar but different way, is something I see a lot of my clients grappling with. What I see people saying is some version of, how dare I allow myself to pursue what I really want when it's different from everything I've ever known and is different from what I thought my life was going to go like and is different from what other people around me expect of me. How dare I be this freak of my own creation? How dare I choose to believe that I might be able to actually call the shots in my life and create the life that I want to live? How dare I believe that if I go after what I really want, even if what I want seems totally weird, everything might turn out okay? And to those kinds of questions, I say, how dare you not to? How dare you not be brave enough to chart your own course? How dare you not be an example to others of what is possible? How dare you not be brave enough to color outside of the lines and show people that the world won't end when you do so? Now, I don't mean to say any of that too harshly. When we're terrified of making changes in our lives, it doesn't help much to have anyone intentionally speak to us harshly. At least I certainly don't think so. But I do want you to take these kinds of questions seriously. And I want you to consider that we just might owe it to ourselves to show ourselves that life can be okay and so much better than okay if we dare to do things differently. And I want you to consider that we also just might owe it to others to set the example that it's okay to do things differently. Or put differently, we might want to be helpful to others by being examples of what is possible when we dare to do things differently. Because sometimes, in order to live the way we want to live, we have to do stuff that scares the shit out of us to get there. And sometimes we have to do that stuff again and again and again and again and again. Sometimes the stuff that was initially scary gets a whole lot less scary pretty quickly. And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the only way to get where we want to go is to be willing to do the scary stuff repeatedly, even though it still scares us. because we know that we really want to create a new version of ourselves or of our lives, because we know that we owe it to ourselves on some cosmic level to get to the place we want to go by being willing to do the scary things. Because we want so badly to be faithful to becoming a fuller expression of who we are. And sometimes because we know that the only alternative to doing stuff we consider really scary is being miserable. And sometimes we get to the point where we just aren't willing to be miserable anymore. And that's basically what I had to do to get to the point where I am now of making a living, doing work that I love, and being totally at peace with not having what I used to consider a quote unquote real job. Am I afraid of people thinking that it's cheesy or stupid that I'm a relationship coach at this point? Absolutely not. I couldn't care less about what people think about my job title or what it means to be a coach or whether or not I'm qualified to do what I do or what it means about me that I'm part of an unregulated profession. If coaching even counts as a profession in the first place. I am totally at peace with myself and my work. And there are a million reasons for this, but I won't list them. The point that I want to make about all of this is that it really took me time to make these shifts in my thinking. It did not happen overnight. I had to keep on being willing to do difficult and scary things for a long time. And that included continuing to be willing to wrestle with my limiting beliefs for a long time. It was really scary for me to take on the idea that maybe the world wouldn't end if I gave up my sociological job. Maybe the world wouldn't end if I decided to earn my living as a member of an unregulated profession that doesn't even necessarily count as a profession. That was hard for me, right? Again, to echo what I said earlier, all of this may sound hilarious to you. And it's funny to me now, but it was not funny at the time. And a lot of us have our own version of this. Now, I just want to be clear that none of this is to say that I've reached this point in my professional life where I never have to do difficult or scary things anymore. I certainly do have to do difficult and scary things, but it's a whole different ball game now. Having successfully dealt with the uniquely difficult challenges in my life that I've been telling you about put me in a very different position, both in terms of the circumstances of my professional life and in terms of my capacities to deal with challenges in my professional life, right? And a lot of what I've just said applies to people's infidelity situations in all kinds of ways. Specifically, although your infidelity situation doesn't need to be terribly difficult to deal with, it may be difficult to deal with. And the only way to get through that difficulty may be to be willing to do difficult, scary things. And you may have to keep on doing difficult, scary things for longer than you'd like to. And interestingly enough, many of the difficult and scary things that you do may happen exclusively between your ears. The hardest things you have to do may be related to wrangling your own thinking, right? This is one of the fundamental tensions within the human experience that I don't think there's a way to escape. Situations in life that we find difficult usually never have to be as hard as we may make them, but sometimes things are indeed pretty hard. And if we want things to be different for us, the only way to make that happen is to be willing to keep going, to be willing to keep on working with our thoughts, to be willing to keep on working with our feelings, to be willing to keep on taking different kinds of actions. And when we're willing to keep going in these ways, we can create really big changes for ourselves. And then we get to reap the rewards of having done so. And that's incredible. Okay. In last week's episode, I told you that I became attuned to the stigma and special significance associated with sexuality and related things at a pretty young age. And I told you that on the one hand, there might not be any neat explanation for that, for why I came to be that way. And there might not need to be any neat explanation. And I also told you last week that there might be another reason or another answer to the question of why I picked up on all of the things related to sexuality and relationships that I did when I was as little as I was. And now I'll tell you what that is. Astrology, or rather, the specifics of my astrological placements. I'm not here to sell you on astrology, but I will tell you that I have found insights from astrology rather useful in understanding aspects of myself that I've had a hard time making sense of or figuring out what to do with. For example, when I learned what a rising sign is and what a moon sign is, and when I found out what my rising sign and what my moon sign were and still are, I was like, oh, well, that explains an awful lot. Many people only know what their sun sign is. And for years, I only knew what my sun sign was. And the sun sign is an important piece of astrological information, but it's not the only important aspect of your astrological makeup. And so when I finally found out what my rising sign and moon sign were and some of my other placements were, I was like, oh, well, gee, that is illuminating. And if you're curious, I will tell you that my rising sign is Scorpio and my moon sign is Scorpio too. And if you know what that means, you can feel very, very sorry for me. Thank you very much. And I'm kind of joking, and I'm also kind of not joking. Anyway, some years ago, at the very beginning of my professional meltdown / midlife crisis thing that I started describing in last week's episode, I had a reading done by an astrologer who gave me a piece of insight that proved pretty useful or pretty interesting. I'm not going to tell you exactly what the placement is because I've long since lost the notes from this conversation, and I'd probably get some critical details wrong. But I have a planet in a house and in a sign that suggests that I'm inclined to work with things that are secret or kept secretive or are hidden or are somehow cut off from the rest of society. The astrologer basically said that in order for me to find the most professional satisfaction, I had to find a way to fight for something that isn't usually fought for, or to help fight for something that usually isn't considered worthy of fighting for, or something that's usually kept secret. Now, when I had this reading with this astrologer, I wasn't sure what to make of this. I thought it sounded interesting, but I didn't know what to do with it. At the time, I had that full-time sociological job that I hated, and I was doing a little bit of holistic health work on the side. And I was considering teaching yoga in prisons because that seemed vaguely interesting and important to me. And it seemed like it could provide some way to scratch the itch that I didn't know how else to scratch. And I told the astrologer this, and she was like, oh yeah, that could be a way of making use of this particular astrological placement for you. Maybe that's the way to satisfy you. I was never really that interested in teaching yoga in prisons to begin with, and I quickly lost interest in pursuing that idea. Not because it isn't a worthy thing to do or an interesting thing to do, but it just wasn't that compelling to me. And so, for a time, I puzzled over what the hell I was going to do with my professional life, and occasionally I thought about how I might make use of that astrological insight. If I was going to work in the realm of things that are usually kept hidden or secret, what did that mean exactly? What did it mean to fight for things that aren't usually fought for? What specifically was I supposed to be doing? Years later, it hit me. I was doing it. I had figured out how to work with this piece of my astrology. I do work in the realm of secrets. I do fight for something that isn't usually fought for. I deal with matters that people often attempt to shun or shame or hide. How about that? Maybe I have figured out how to use this part of me in a way that I find satisfying and others find helpful. Solving this puzzle, to the extent that I have solved it, felt like the accomplishment of a major piece of karmic business. In Paul Beatty's amazing novel, The Sellout, there's a character who sometimes has the occasion to say to people, you've got to ask yourself two questions. Who am I And how may I become myself? You've got to ask yourself 2 questions. Who am I? And how may I become myself? And I think that these are questions that we might want to ask ourselves as often as possible. And for me, in going through the torturous process of giving myself permission to leave a so-called real job that I hated and embark upon the journey of making the work I do my source of livelihood, I have answered those questions for myself to some extent. Who am I? How may I become myself? Those might be questions that you consider it important for you to answer for yourself too. But let's return to this matter of my astrological chart for a moment. You can take this with as many grains of salt as you want to, but maybe, just maybe, I'm just doing the work that I came here to do. Maybe my professional interests and inclinations aren't really mine at all. Or maybe they were mine before I even existed. Or maybe I'm not really the one who came up with them. Maybe this is just my mission from God. I mean that lightly. I don't subscribe to any particular concept of God. Put it differently, maybe I'm just doing the mission the stars laid out for me. Who knows? My point is not that astrology explains everything or that you should become an astrological determinist. But I am saying that maybe the question of why we're interested in doing the work we're doing could potentially have a lot of different answers. And maybe we can never fully know the answers. And this applies to why we want what we want in our love lives too, abundantly. Now that said, I've just given you my best attempt at telling you the story of how I got to doing the work I do. And as the emotion in my voice in this episode and last week's has no doubt indicated, it's been kind of hard for me to tell you this tale. I told you last week that I was out of the habit of talking about myself, and I meant it. I hope that these 2 episodes provided interesting insights into how I came to doing this relatively unusual thing that I do. But more than that, I hope I've provided some indication that you too can recreate your life in whatever ways you want to. Doing so may be scary. Doing so may be hard. There may not be any roadmap for you to follow. You may not have a cheering squad as you step forth into the great unknown. But you can still take tenacious steps into uncharted territory. You can have faith in yourself and what is possible. You can create a version of yourself and your life that doesn't yet exist. You can do it one step at a time. Because really, that's the only way to do it. And you can do it even if you're scared. There's a saying that holds that you can speak your truth even if your voice shakes, and clearly I've been taking that to heart. But I would like to extend that idea a little further. You can take steps towards creating the life you want to live, even if you're scared, even if your legs wobble as you step forth. And there is good news. Help is available. My help is available. You do not have to deal with resolving your infidelity situation all by yourself. You don't have to deal with your fears all by yourself. I can help you do all the things. You'll still have to do all the things, but oh my God, having the right help as you do all the things makes such a difference. As I said earlier in today's episode, I had varying degrees of help as I went through the professional transformation journey I've told you about in this episode and last week's. And although some of the help I got wasn't amazing, any help is helpful and good help is life-changing. And at this point in my life, I don't fuck around anymore. I pay a lot of money for good coaching now because I never want to deal with a life challenge as inefficiently as I dealt with the one I've told you about today and last week. At this point in my life, it is so important to me to get my nonsense in check as quickly as possible. I don't want to be beholden to my own limiting ideas of what's possible for me for any longer than I absolutely have to be. I want to make wise use of my time on earth. So when you are ready to resolve your infidelity situation in a way that's truly right for you, let's work together. If you just need a little nudge, you can purchase my self-guided course, You're Not the Only One, which contains teachings that are based on what I've learned from helping hundreds of clients with their infidelity situations. I give you the distillation of the most potent teachings that I give to my one-on-one clients. When you purchase that course, you get instant access to video teachings and assignments that you can access online all the time. And you can find You're Not the Only One on my website, mariemurphyphd.com/services. And we can also work together one-on-one. If you want intensive, personalized assistance, this is the way to go. When we work together one-on-one, our collaboration is intimate, consistent, and rigorous. If you're serious about changing your life, let's get to work. When we work together one-on-one, we meet via Zoom, which means we can collaborate no matter where you're located. If you want to work with me one-on-one, the first step is to schedule an introductory coaching session, which you can do through my website, mariemurphyphd.com. I can't wait to meet you. Okay, as promised, I have a little announcement. The next episode of this podcast will not come out next week. It will come out in 2 weeks. And the one after that will come out 2 weeks after that. I am switching to a bi-weekly format. And by the way, I've always been uncertain about the use of the word bi-weekly. Does it mean every other week or does it mean twice a week? So I Googled it for like the millionth time, but hopefully this is the time that will stick to check what it means. Is bi-weekly twice a week or is it every other week? And as it turns out, Merriam-Webster says, yes, bi-weekly can mean both every 2 weeks and twice a week. And no, there's nothing we can do about it. For whatever reasons, I found this answer both delightful and reassuring. Anyway, to be absolutely clear, this podcast will now be coming out once every 2 weeks, not once a week, not twice a week, once every 2 weeks. So with that, I will talk to you in 2 weeks. Thank you all so much for listening. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me with Dr. Marie Murphy. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.